When the Xaltrai first requested a demonstration of humanity's recreational activities, I knew the council underestimated what they were asking. I had studied them for decades, observed their rituals, their hierarchies, their silence. They moved like predators, cold and precise, yet they had no concept of chaos beyond the boundaries of logic. And yet they wanted to see humans play. The arena was vast, a hollow projection chamber suspended above the surface of the neutral moon, its gravity adjusted to Earth normal. The Xaltrai envoys entered, their crystalline exoskeletons refracting the chamber lights, casting prismatic shadows across the floor. They did not sit. They hovered, their multi-lensed eyes scanning, calculating, dissecting. I stood with the human delegation, my heart pounding, knowing the observation would become something none of them expected. The first game began innocuously enough. Children, humans no more than 10 standard cycles in age, lined up in a field marked with crude chalk lines. One child's eyes closed, fingers counting silently against their palm. The others scattered. The Xaltrai whispered calculations, evasion probability, escape trajectories, tactical clustering. They were pleased. They assumed it was a form of harmless sport, a primitive simulation of spatial awareness. Then, the counting stopped. The designated seeker's eyes opened, and their posture changed. Muscles tensed, shoulders lowered, gaze sharpened. They moved, not running, but calculating, predicting, exploiting every shadow and line of sight. The other children moved with the same precision, feigning patterns, breaking formations, anticipating capture, and counteracting it with unspoken signals. The Xaltrai leaned forward. They had never seen such synchronized, adaptive maneuvering in beings they assumed were defenseless. When the first child was tagged, a ripple of chaos erupted. Shouts, laughter, screams, all layered in a symphony of motion. The captured child became the next seeker. The dynamic shifted. Alliances formed and dissolved. Tactics evolved in real time. The Xaltrai analysts recorded with fervor, noting variables, outcomes, success rates. One envoy whispered, a hiss of disbelief, "They are teaching strategy before comprehension." Next came the sticks. They were primitive, uneven lengths of wood. Two teams faced each other across a drawn boundary. The human liaison explained, the objective was to knock them out. The Xaltrai tilted their heads. Violence, without lethality, was not in their culture. But as the sticks collided, the lessons became apparent. Timing, force calibration, angles of approach, defensive positioning. Blows landed, reactions measured. Pain was acknowledged, analyzed, and converted into experience. The Xaltrai recoiled at the complexity. Children were learning combat without casualties. Efficiency, adaptability, resilience. Then the floor became lava. Or so the humans claimed. Platforms, markers, imaginary hazards shifted across the chamber floor. The Xaltrai watched as children leapt, fell, recovered, calculated trajectories midair. When one slipped, others rescued them, improvising new paths, exploiting environmental shifts. Every failure became a learning opportunity. Every misstep rehearsed crisis management. By the end, the Xaltrai had logged more simulations in 1 hour than their military academies had in decades. The final demonstration began quietly. A child was isolated, given a word unknown to the group. The others created misinformation, subtle lies, half-truths, strategic ambiguity. The isolated child attempted to navigate this network of deception, punished or rewarded according to their choices. Social engineering, misdirection, psychological endurance, all taught before empathy could dilute the lesson. The Xaltrai were frozen. They had cataloged intelligence and tactics for centuries, but these humans were evolving organically. Play became training, laughter became drills, games became warfare in miniature. When the liaison ended the session, the children left, chattering and hungry, unaware of the storm they had unleashed. The Xaltrai envoys remained behind, silent, processing. Their holoscreens flickered with data points, probability curves, predictive outcomes, all failing to encompass the depth of the lesson. One finally spoke, voice tight. "And this is recreation?" I did not answer. I could not. Because the lesson had begun, and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity had been preparing its young for war long before any enemy arrived. The Xaltrai did not depart after the demonstration. They lingered, quietly, as if the shadows of human play had left a residue in their sensors they could not scrub. Their fleets loomed in orbit, their tendrils of observation probing cities and towns, scanning playgrounds and schoolyards. Every laugh, every shout, every spontaneous movement was analyzed and classified. The humans below went about their routines, unaware that they had become an existential puzzle to an empire built on control and certainty. I was assigned as intermediary, translator, and observer, though my own people whispered that I had been chosen as much to monitor the monitors as to provide context. They wanted context, but context was the veil, not the answer. I led them through schools, gyms, and open fields where children learned the subtleties of movement, risk, and consequence. The Xaltrai envoys moved in perfect precision, their multi-lensed eyes recording every micro-expression, every variation of behavior. Yet no data could capture the essence of human play, adaptability shaped by unpredictability. In one classroom, a single child stood and deliberately disrupted an exercise. Notes were forgotten, lines crossed, schedules ignored. The Xaltrai gasped as other children responded immediately, improvising new strategies to complete the task, incorporating the disruption seamlessly. The teachers did nothing. The disruption was not punished. It was absorbed, adapted to, transformed into new learning. The Xaltrai interpreters faltered in translating. In their culture, failure without immediate correction was a flaw.
In ours, it was curriculum.
At recess, the children ran through simulated obstacles, sometimes imaginary, sometimes real. The Xaltrai were fascinated by how children combined speed, foresight, and collaboration in ways that defied algorithmic prediction. One child deliberately led others into a dead end, only to spring a clever escape route moments later. The observers murmured calculations, probability of success, resource efficiency, casualty estimates. I could see the realization dawning. These were simulations of conflict, rehearsals of chaos, and the instructors were children, laughing while the Empire's analysts reeled. In the cafeteria, trade negotiations unfolded over snacks. Alliances formed and dissolved within minutes. Promises made were broken and renegotiated. When a disagreement escalated, children resolved it with minimal supervision, improvising consequences and rewards with logic and whimsy intertwined. The Xaltrai took careful notes, labeling the phenomena as proto-diplomacy. One envoy whispered to another, incredulous, "Their political instincts are instinctual, trained through play." The most disturbing lesson came during a hallway drill. Alarms blared, without warning. The children executed evacuation protocols flawlessly, anticipating routes, covering gaps, and adapting to obstacles the Xaltrai had planted as stress variables. The analysts' probability engines collapsed. The human children had internalized contingency, risk assessment, and coordinated response to unpredictable threats before being formally instructed. Fear had been taught, exercised, and mastered, not avoided, not ignored. Later, I observed the Xaltrai convene an emergency council. Crests dimmed and flickered, their usual cold composure fractured. They debated the implications of what they had witnessed. One high-ranking envoy, voice trembling behind the crystalline resonator, asked the question none of them wanted to confront. How does this continue into adulthood? When do they stop playing these games? I did not answer. I had seen the answer in the glances of adults navigating emergencies with grace, in the unspoken coordination of teams, in the adaptability of our leaders in situations that would have broken lesser species. Childhood was not a phase. It was training, rehearsal, and preparation, wrapped in laughter, joy, and chaos. Every skipped step, every playful conflict, every improvised strategy was a lesson encoded into muscle memory, intuition, and social instinct. By evening, the Xaltrai had withdrawn to their observation stations. Their holoscreens glowed with streams of data, charts and graphs incapable of measuring the depth of human adaptability. The laughter of children echoed faintly across the sensors, a sound at once harmless and terrifying. Somewhere in their calculations, they realized the truth. Humanity's recreation was not benign. It was preparation. I stood alone on the observation platform as the sun dipped below the horizon. The children's shadows stretched across playgrounds, stretching, bending, and twisting like the beginning of a strategy the Xaltrai could neither predict nor contain. The Empire had seen war in miniature, taught by our young, and they had no idea that this was only the first lesson. And somewhere, deep within the Xaltrai Council, fear began to bloom. By the third week, the Xaltrai's fascination had hardened into unease. They no longer observed openly. They calculated, monitored, and whispered to one another in frequencies beyond human hearing. Their crystallized forms shimmered with suppressed tension, refracting the chamber lights in angles that betrayed uncertainty. I moved among them, guiding, translating, yet increasingly aware that humanity had become a paradox they could not solve. The humans, oblivious, continued their exercises. In the gyms, children ran obstacle courses with shifting parameters. One day, the floor became lava. The next, the walls dissolved into imaginary barriers. They invented hazards mid-motion, coordinated rescues when someone fell, and adapted on the fly. Each session was catalogued by the Xaltrai, their holoscreens filling with predictive data, trajectories, timing windows, reaction patterns. And every time, the projections failed to capture the full scope. Variables multiplied faster than their processors could account for, patterns emerged that were not predictable, and success was defined not by a singular outcome, but by adaptation itself. During one observation, an Xaltrai envoy turned to me, whispering in sharp clicks, "Why do they cooperate even when the objective is to win?" I chose my words carefully. Because they understand that winning is temporary. Mastery comes from understanding the system, not defeating it outright. The envoy tilted, processing. In their culture, victory was absolute, final, and static. Humanity's children treated conflict as a rehearsal, a stage, a game with multiple endings. That evening, we entered a classroom for social exercises. A single child was isolated and given a secret word, the others instructed to mislead. Lies were crafted, alliances subtly shifted, and the isolated child struggled to discern truth from deception. Each failure was met with mock punishments, playful shoves, exaggerated wails, collective laughter. The Xaltrai observed in stunned silence. They had trained analysts in strategy, deception, and interrogation, yet these children executed psychological simulations instinctively. The turning point came unexpectedly. A group of Xaltrai juveniles, left alone during a demonstration, began to imitate the human exercises. At first, it was small, feints, minor evasions, coordinated movements without guidance. Then it escalated. They created hazards, manipulated sequences, challenged one another's assumptions. They were laughing. The human liaison smiled knowingly. The Xaltrai's own children were learning improvisation in the way the humans had, without instruction. Their supervisors recoiled. Control was fracturing. Word reached the high strategos. The council convened in emergency. Strategies were recalculated, doctrines revised, compliance protocols issued. They sent fleets into orbit, not to attack, but to contain observation. Orders were precise, strict, unyielding. And yet, within hours, minor deviations began. Scheduled patrols arrived early or late. Drones paused mid-flight, waiting for instructions that never came. The Xaltrai were discovering, far too late, that you cannot contain improvisation once it has been internalized. The humans themselves remained calm. They did not provoke, did not manipulate. They played. They laughed. They improvised without malice. The Xaltrai interpreted it as defiance, aggression, or the beginnings of rebellion. Each report fed the Council's growing paranoia. Calculations of risk, probability, and outcome failed to converge. The analysts admitted privately that the humans' recreational systems were teaching lessons that no simulation could replicate: adaptability, resilience, foresight, and instinctual coordination. By the end of the week, the first real signs of panic emerged. The Xaltrai juveniles, mimicking human exercises, refused to comply with procedural commands. Not with words, not with force, not with punishment. They simply paused, observed, and responded unpredictably. Orders became suggestions. Algorithms failed. Doctrines cracked. The Empire's veneer of absolute control began to splinter. I walked the empty observation deck late that night, watching the city glow beneath the moonlight. Somewhere in the streets, children played chase, devised strategies on the fly, and executed plans that no adult had formally taught. Somewhere above, Xaltrai analysts recalculated, aware that every metric, every model, was insufficient. They had observed humanity, expecting simplicity, and discovered complexity beyond comprehension. And for the first time, I saw the true terror in the Xaltrai's crystalline eyes. They were not afraid of our weapons, our fleets, or even our technology. They were afraid of our play. They had glimpsed what human beings could become when joy, risk, and strategy were inseparable, and realized they had no defense against a species that trained for war through laughter long before it was necessary. The Xaltrai did not respond with fleets, not yet. They responded with obsession. The empire that had once prided itself on precision and control began to fracture from within, and I watched it unravel like a tapestry pulled at its edges. Analysts worked around the clock, recalculating every outcome, every trajectory, every probability of human behavior, yet each model collapsed under the weight of improvisation and unpredictability. They were witnessing, in real time, the consequences of underestimating a species that had rehearsed chaos for centuries under the guise of play. I was summoned to the High Strategos' chamber, the room vast and imposing, filled with floating holoscreens of rotating Earth cities, playgrounds, and simulated battlefields. The Strategos spoke without looking at me, voice echoing across the chamber like grinding crystal. "Explain this anomaly," he demanded. "They play games. They laugh. And yet they prepare, adapt, and survive. Their progression is exponential."
How?
I chose my words carefully. "You misunderstand. They are not preparing for war in the sense you conceive. They are preparing for life. The games are lessons in consequence, risk, strategy, and adaptation. War is merely one application of these skills. It is a side effect of a system designed to teach resilience and improvisation." He turned, eyes narrowing, crystals in his exoskeleton flickering in low light. "And you believe this is sustainable?" "I believe it is unstoppable," I said. Across the Empire, subtle rebellions began to bloom. Xaltrai juveniles refused to follow prescribed drills, improvising instead, testing boundaries, experimenting with risk and response. Parents attempted to enforce compliance, but instinctive imitation had taken hold. Children remembered lessons taught by humans: deception, coordination, improvisation, and adaptation. For the first time, control was no longer absolute. The council convened emergency sessions. Protocols were rewritten. Predictive models expanded, recalibrated, and then abandoned. The Empire's fleet command debated preemptive strikes, yet hesitation ruled every decision. Ships poised for action waited for instructions that could not account for variables human children had already mastered through play. The Strategos ordered simulations of offensive strategies, only to find every scenario countered by probabilistic adaptations inspired by their own juveniles' behavior. Meanwhile, humanity remained patient, calm, deliberate. They did not strike, did not manipulate, did not provoke. They played. Streets, parks, gyms, classrooms, all became stages for simulations of risk, coordination, and strategy. Adults reinforced the lessons without revealing them as lessons. The Xaltrai observed, frantically recording data, convinced that every spontaneous act was an attack vector. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A human liaison, working with the Xaltrai juveniles, guided them through a simple exercise: hiding and rescuing human civilians in abandoned habitat rings. The Xaltrai juveniles executed flawlessly, lying, evading detection, rerouting drones, and protecting innocents, all as a game. No orders. No oversight. Only improvisation and instinct. Reports flooded the council. Operational protocols had been bypassed, security systems neutralized, and human lives safeguarded. The council was paralyzed. For the first time, the high strategos admitted privately that the humans' recreational activities had been underestimated. They were no longer simple amusements. They were complex simulations of conflict, risk, social engineering, and survival. Every laugh, every chase, every tactical game was a training module, encoded into muscle, intuition, and cognition. The children had been teaching the Empire without ever realizing it. By nightfall, the Xaltrai's outer colonies reported minor insurrections, delays in obedience, spontaneous coordination among juveniles, laughter in forbidden places, and subtle subversion of authority. The Empire's predictive algorithms failed repeatedly, each error compounding the last. Officers whispered about contamination, contagion, and the danger of underestimating humans. I watched the city from a high observation deck. Below, children ran, leapt, and improvised. Their laughter echoed faintly across the sensors, harmless in intent, but devastating in consequence. The Xaltrai were learning, too late, that chaos could not be contained once it had been internalized. And somewhere, deep within the crystalline council chambers, fear bloomed. Not of weapons, not of fleets, not of conquest. Fear of the impossible, a species that trained for war through play, that laughed while learning, that adapted instinctively to threats, and that could turn even joy into strategy. The first true cracks had appeared. The Empire was awake, and for the first time, aware that humanity had already won the game they did not even know they were playing. The Xaltrai fleets hovered silently above human cities, each vessel a gleaming monument to control and calculation. Their weapons hummed with latent energy, calibrated to precision, yet no order was given. For the first time, uncertainty ruled the Empire. Across the crystalline spires of their capital, councils debated, algorithms recalculated, and fear spread. Not the fear of defeat, but of being outpaced by something they could not measure. The first act of resistance came not from soldiers or diplomats, but from the children themselves. Xaltrai juveniles began to disobey minor orders. They lingered where they were told to move, paused when told to act, and experimented with improvisation learned from humans. Their supervisors reported anomalies, data streams flagged inconsistencies, and for the first time, predictive models failed to converge. The Empire had never encountered disobedience so fluid, so adaptive, so unpunishable. On Earth, the humans did nothing overtly hostile. They played. Schools, gyms, streets. Everywhere, games unfolded with a logic that was invisible to the Xaltrai yet devastating in effect. One exercise involved improvising evacuation paths during a simulated emergency. The humans worked together instinctively, rescuing, rerouting, coordinating, and laughing at the absurdity of the challenge. From orbit, sensors misread this as confusion, but on the ground, it was education. Every child's movement was rehearsal, every laugh a lesson in risk and reward. I was recalled to witness the escalation in the Xaltrai Council. The high strategos spoke, voice echoing, crystal resonators vibrating in agitation. We cannot predict them. We cannot control them. They're children, they adapt faster than our systems. His words, usually final, carried a tremor. For the first time, he admitted vulnerability. The juveniles escalated their mimicry of human tactics. They organized impromptu simulations of threat response, coordinated defenses, and enacted playful strategies that neutralized the authority of adult commands. The council attempted to respond with punishment protocols, yet the juveniles simply adapted. One intervention created 3 new unplanned strategies, and laughter rippled through corridors where silence should have ruled. Humanity's influence had spread further than anyone realized. Minor incidents in orbital stations, supply lines, and training facilities became unsolvable puzzles. The Xaltrai attempted containment. Fleets moved to enforce order. Yet every maneuver was countered with improvisation learned from play. Every protocol designed to maintain compliance failed under spontaneous adaptation. Then the transmission came. Human liaison officers had activated communication channels to the Xaltrai juveniles. Without threat, without command, they sent games, challenges, and riddles. The children responded instantly, hijacking the channels, flooding data streams with laughter, feints, and counter-challenges. The screens in the Strategos' chamber glowed with thousands of moving patterns, untraceable, unpredictable. Control was slipping from the Empire like sand through claws of crystal. The High Strategos convened his final council. Fleet commands were overridden by juvenile improvisation. Protocols for discipline were rewritten by algorithms incapable of predicting the outcomes. Somewhere, hidden in maintenance tunnels and empty corridors, Xaltrai juveniles hid, coordinated, and executed simulations indistinguishable from war exercises, yet unsanctioned. I watched from the observation deck as fleets powered down mid-maneuver, commanders hesitated, and the Empire froze in confusion. The humans below continued to play. Children counted, hid, ran, jumped, feigned, deceived, and adapted. They had turned what the Xaltrai thought of as simple recreation into living, breathing war simulations. Every laugh was a feint, every chase a maneuver, every rule broken a strategy learned, and in that silence, the galaxy waited. Unknown observers beyond mapped space noticed the anomaly. Calculations ran in alien minds across light years. The Xaltrai, an empire of precision, faltering under the influence of something they had dismissed as play. Humanity had trained its young not with weapons, not with doctrines, but with games. And those games were more dangerous than fleets. I turned to watch children in a park, oblivious to the cosmic tension above them. They ran, they leapt, they laughed. And somewhere, in the cold darkness of space, the first ripple of recognition spread. The species that plays while mastering war cannot be contained, cannot be controlled, cannot be defeated. And somewhere, a child counted softly, eyes closed, a smile on their face, while the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see who would be found next. The game was only beginning.